Here, if you can see my screen and listen to my voice, please confirm so that we can proceed with today's topics. If you have any questions on yesterday's session, please go ahead and let me know on single user instance and condition scripts and global variables, the ones that we saw yesterday. If you have any questions on that, please let me know. I'll be glad to answer them. If you have any question, you can unmute yourself, or please raise your hand so that I can unmute you and you can go ahead and ask your question. Alright, so I appreciate that. So today we will be looking at multi-user instance. So multi-user instance is an environment especially where we have multiple people. Sandeep, not able to see my screen. Rest of you guys, you are able to see my screen. Please confirm because alright, thank you. Right. So right, thank you guys. So yesterday we were right. So multi-user instance is an environment, especially when we are working on small and medium enterprises or large enterprises, right? So we will consider these environments, especially we need more number of people to work on the project. So generic requirement, as an architect, we will go and see how many modules that the customer is active in, right? First one is volume of data. How many TBs the volume of data is present on the source, and then number of sources, right? The modules in which the customer is extended into and their dependencies and the complexity. So based on these simple factors, we can go and look at a project and say, hey, this is a normal project, a simple project where only one user is required, or this is a complex project where multiple people are required. So based on that, we'll go with a multi-user instance, and we will be creating local repositories like LR1, LR2, and LR3 for developer 1, 2, 3, and similarly for testers we can create another local repositories, and production load consultant we can create another local repository. Now we know how to create a local repository. We need to see how to create a central repository. So let's go and write it down on a notepad. First one is how to create a central repository. I don't think like we need to talk about the definition of central repository because we already saw that yesterday. So uploading your code into the central repository and then maintaining the version. So we will see in detail what all we can do while we work with central repository. So before that, we will see how to create a central repository. So this is an admin role. So how to create a central repository. Then the second one is secure and non-secure central repository. So we'll see the differences. So what is secure central repository? What is a non-secure central repository? We'll see the differences, and we will see how a non-secure central repository is functionally different from a secure central repository and how people can use it. So With this, we'll go and proceed like how do I create a secure central repository. Then second thing is how to use a central repository. So which means how a developer can use that. Then once we convert that into a secure or non-secure central repository, we will see how a developer, tester, and an admin can work on the central repository, and also we will list out the differences there. So it's pretty much similar to what we did in local repository. First one is create a database, then second one is create a central repository using the repository manager. Then third step, register your central repository in the management console, central management console. Fourth step is to go to your designer and configure your central repository. So technically speaking, on a data services designer, we can configure more than one central repository, but we can keep only one central repository as active central repository. We can have more connections, but thing is that only one active central repository will be present. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we can configure more than one central repository in my data services designer. So first step is to create a database. So let us go and log into database 2000 Data 2 and Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So log into the database and let me see if I can reuse the database, db_cr. So I have a database. So it's just the same process. You need to go and select the databases, right click and create new database. And here once you give this, you need to give the name db_cr and click on OK. So I'm just trying to avoid creation of multiple databases as this database is increasing exponentially day by day. So I'm just trying to reduce the usage, reuse the existing database. So let us assume that we already created one database, db_cr. Then what is the next step? Next step is to create a central repository using a repository manager. So the navigation for repository manager is start, all programs, data services 4.2, and repository manager. So by now you know the tools that we have in data services. One is designer, the second one is repository manager, then the third one is server manager, and then fourth one is management console. Right, so these are the main major four tools that we'll be using. So repository manager, click on that and it will open the repository manager window where we will be selecting the repository type to be central. Earlier we created local, but now we will be creating a central repository. So there is a checkbox. For local you don't have this checkbox for enable security, but for central repository you have this checkbox for enabling security. So we'll enable that a little later so that we'll know the difference between a non-secure and a secure central repository. The database, backend database is SQL Server, so it supports the same databases as local repository, which will be created on top of this one. Then BO41 is my server name and database name is db_cr as I'm reusing that one. Username and password. And again, what you need to follow the same process that we followed for creation of local repository. First step is to get version to make sure that that central repository, that database is not used. Okay, so it says secure central repository is already present because we are trying to reuse this one. So go and click on create. So it will drop and recreate a fresh central repository in the same space, same database space. So once it is created, we'll go and see get version, and it will say non-secure central repository is created because it is not enabled with security. Central repository was created successfully. Now go and click on get version and it says non-secure central repository is created. As we'll close this one and go to the next step, register that in your management console, central management console. So navigation for that is what? Start, all programs, business intelligence, and BI platform 4. And here you will find the central management console. Click on that and give the password. So we already logged into this tool when we created local repository. Okay. One second. What is wrong with this? Just give me a second. Just give me a few seconds. If it is not working on the system, we can connect to another system and look into it. just give me a second. Alright, so we'll see that on another system. That system has some technical issues. So I have a database db_cr, and I'll go and create the repository, central repository, using repository manager. Then the server name, this one is different, BOIDS, this is a different server. Then database name is db_cr, username and password, and just go and click on create. It's already available. I'm trying to reuse the same database, so it will drop and recreate that one. And as we've seen earlier, once it is done, it will go and create a non-secure central repository. So once it is done, we will go and log into BI platform, and we'll go to Central Management Console. So now if you just click on C, get version, right, this is a non-secure central repository. So just close that and go to this one, Central Management Console. Login, right, and here we find the data services on the bottom, or you can scroll to this image here and you can click on that. So once you click on that, you'll find a place where all the repositories are registered. Go and click on configure a new data services repository. Repository name cr_dev, and you can give development central repository, and database type is Microsoft SQL Server, and the database server name is BOIDS. The port, you leave it as default. db_cr and username, password, and just click on test connection to see if everything is communicating. Right, and click on save. So if you, okay, 1, 2, 3, the name is already present, so it is not taking that name, so we gave the new name. Right, so it's cr_dev, and if you see next to it, the type of the central repository, it says it is a non-secure central repository that is present in the system, right? So I'll go and see a non-secure central repository. So one step that we are not doing here when we are creating the central repositories, when compared to local repositories, we are not going and adding it to a job server, because we will not be executing, or we cannot execute any jobs from the central repository, so we are not tagging it to the job server. So first step is create a database. Second step is create a central repository using a repo manager. Then third step is register that in the central management console. So I just mentioned management console because it depends on the version that you are working on. If it is 3.x, so you'll be registering that in data services management console. If it is 4.x, you'll be registering that in central management console. Fourth step, do not think about the job server, because we'll not be creating any job server here or adding a central repository to the job server, because we'll not be able to execute any jobs from the central repository. So fifth step is log in to designer, the fourth step, and config the central repository. Alright, so now we are on the last step here. Go to the data services designer. So I'll just pick LR2. Okay, not bad. We have at least one job so that we can work on the central repository. Okay, now okay, we can go and create that. Now if you look at this one, this icon here, it is grayed out, which is central object library. So since your data services designer is not configured with central object library, it is grayed out. Now let me just log into some other repository which has jobs in it, so that we can look at all the functionalities of central repository without creating the new jobs. We'll try to utilize the existing jobs. Alright, so I have all the data stores here, and I have all the jobs, so I can look at the central repository here by configuring or utilizing these jobs. So to configure your central repository, go to the tools, central repository, and just delete this. As I told you, you can configure more than one central repository, so in the initial screen you'll see something like this. When you go to Tools and Central Repositories, it will be blank. So you need to add a central repository here. So just click on Add and give the username and password, and just click on Login, and you will see the central repository that we just created. So just click on OK, and before you click on OK, if you see, all of them have a log symbol, which means that they are secure, and this is a non-secure central repository. We'll see how do we convert this into a secure central repository. So select the central repository, click on OK, and then give the password, database password, and click on OK, and now you see the central repository added here, and then select that and click on Activate, and once you click on Activate, you will see it activated here. So if you click on this icon, right, so you see something pretty much similar to your local repository. So you have the Projects tab, you have the Jobs tab, you have Workflow, Data Flow, Transformations, Data Stores, Formats, and Functions, right? So you have each and everything pretty much similar to your local repository, right? So this is my central repository, and you know, the main difference between my local and central is local to you, and central is the one that is commonly accessible by all the remaining people. So keep this in mind. So we created a central repository as of now, but this is a non-secure central repository. Okay, now let us go and see how do I utilize this non-secure central repository, and later we will convert that into a secure central repository. So how do I convert it into a secure central repository? What are the different steps, and where else it will be activated when I convert that into a secure central repository? We'll see that in a bit. But now let us see, since we configured our central repository to Designer, so let us see how do we use it. So how do we use a central repository? So now it is active. I just pinned it to my right hand side window. Right, now let us start with the data stores. So in the beginning of the project, what administrator will do is administrator will create a data stores, right? Even before that, you know, we should get what, when you are creating a data store, we should get username and password to connect to our source and target systems, right? So I should get my username and password. But the problem is when in the beginning of the project, the customer will call one person. It can be your manager or lead or an architect or an administrator from your organization, and he will ask you to sign a non-data disclosure agreement, which is called as NDA or NDDA, non-data disclosure agreement, and then only they will get the required permissions on the source and target systems. So read access on the source and read and write access on the target systems. So not all people in a project will be going and signing that one, unless and until you just have 3 people and the customer is okay with that. You will ask 3 people to sign the NDA for him. But if there are, like, let us say 30 people in a project, 40 people in a project, right? So not everyone will go and sign that NDA and give it to the customer. So what he will do is he'll call the administrator or the architect, and he will ask them to sign the NDA for him, and then he will give some application forms which the admin or architect needs to fill, and once done, they will get an access, read access to the source databases and read and write access to the target databases, and read and write access to the intermediate staging databases. So once they get all these things, they will go and create these data stores in their local repository, and then they will add these data stores into the central repository. So this guy will create the data stores here, and we will try to add these data stores into my central repository so that everybody can download these data stores and start working on it. So once it does that, everybody, so developer 1, if he needs these data stores, he can download them into his local system, and he can start working on it. And so is the case with user 2, user 3, user 4 and so on. Right, everybody can utilize the same username and password given by the admin, but still for them the password will be encrypted. So they can get the latest version of the central repository data store from the central repository, but for them the password will be encrypted. They will not know the password. So how will this admin add this central repository? First step is how admin adds, what are the different steps, then how developers get the latest version, so how the developer or a tester get the latest version of the code or of the object in the central repository. And again, if there are changes, how do you maintain versions? So we'll look into that one. So we will see how we maintain the different versions. Then we will see how do we maintain the labels, right? And what is the different ways in which we can add the data into the central repository and retrieve the data from the central repository. So it's all about how do we add, right? And how do we retrieve. And initially I added something, there is some change in the code, there is a defect, I fixed, then I need to add that code back to the central repository. So if I add, will it overwrite my existing or it creates it as a different version? So we'll see all these details end to end in this one. Now let us go and start with admin activities. So how do I add my data stores into my central repository? So as of now the central repository data store tab is empty. So first, if I select my object, so any object in your data services designer, it can be your project or it can be your job. You select that, right click, and you get an option, add to central repository with 3 sub options, right? So let it be your data flow, add to central repository, and then let's start with data stores. So when I select a data store and go for adds to central repository, so it will ask me for 3 different options: objects, objects independent with filter. So what is an object? What is an object independent, and what is a filter? So when I select a particular object, it can be my job, workflow, data flow, right? Anything. So when I say only object, only that particular object will be added. So when I select this data store, this DS source, my dependent objects are my tables. So these tables will not be added to my central repository. Only the data store will be added to the central repository. So we'll see that difference now. So add to central repository object, and once you add anything to the central repository, it will ask you for comments, so where you need to give the author name, then you need to give some description. I'll show you where it will be useful. Initial load of data store to the central repository with objects. Only with the object. So I'm just giving the description and click on continue, and once it is done, you go to your central repository, and in the data store tab you see the data store, and you try to expand these tables and see if there are any tables. No, you did not add any tables because you added only the object. Right, second one is my target data store. I will add with dependents too. Right, or let me add this one with dependents. The third one I can use with filters. So select the data store, and if a data store is already added to the central repository, right, DS source is already added. So if you right click, so this add to central repository option is grayed out. So we will see how we will do the modifications in that case a little later. But let us complete the different options that are present here. So now if I want to add DSSAP data store with objects and dependents, so apply comments to all the objects. So objects and with dependent objects as well. Because we are adding with dependents, this one is active. And adding data store with dependents. Click on continue. Now it is added. You go back to your central repository, open your DSSAP data store and expand, and you'll see Mara, Marcy and Marty, the three tables that we have here. So what are the dependents? Whatever the dependents you have, functions or IDOCs, so all these things will be added to your central repository. So that is objects and dependents. The third one is with filter. So you want to add all the tables, but you don't want some of the tables to be present on your target system because you created them for some test purposes. Sorry, just give me a second. So especially when you are working on projects, right, not all the time you'll be sure shot about your answers, right? So if you use this logic in the transformation, you'll not be always sure that it gives you a right output. So what you need to do is you need to look at that some sample data and then understand that okay, this is how it is working right now. So if I fine tune this further, it will work in a better way. So this is how you will be doing a development generally. You will be creating some sample database tables. But now when you add that to the central repository, you don't want it to be added, right? So you will add this object to central repository, but you will add up with filters. Now when I say filters, it will show me all the objects list that is present here, my tables and my data store, and it says that these objects are not present in the central repository, they do not exist, and if you want to create, you can go and create. So this one I want to keep it to create because I want to have it, but let us say ADF Mara, for just quick reference, I want to exclude that one and keep all the remaining things, right? So all the tables I'm keeping them, just excluding ADF Mara, and just click on next and click on next and give apply comments to all and say author Samuel or Rakesh, and then added with click on continue. So once it is added, you go to your data store, expand the tables, and you'll not see the first table that we just skipped because we filtered it out. So this table is filtered out, so you don't have that, and you have the rest of the tables added to the central repository. So now you must understand, like, this is how I move my code from dev to QA. I upload all the code into my dev central repository. The code promotion guy gets the latest from dev to his local, and from here he will upload that into the QA, and the testers will get the latest version. So whatever the version I have, the same version of the code will be present here. Now this is how we add objects into the central repository, right? So now let's go back to the first one. I added only the objects, but I did not add my dependents. Now I want to add my dependents, which is I want to add my changes to my central repository initially. So let us say initially when I created this data store, there are no dependent tables, and I added that to my central repository. Now there are some dependent objects. Right now I want to add these changes. These are my changes, right? So I want to add these changes to my central repository. And how do I do that? So if I want to add these things, right? So I cannot add it directly to my central repository because it is grayed out. So I just see a new option here. So let me cross check this one. So it says an object add to central repository test, and click on continue. Yes, you can select the object and directly add it. So this is one option. And the second option that we have here is, since you cannot add the data store to the central repository, so you know the mechanism. If you've ever worked on tools like HPQC, so there is a check-in and check-out process. So first you need to check out on the tool. So these tools are used like HPQC, Solman, right? All these tools are used to maintain different versions of the documents. So if you already added a document into this HPQC or Solman tools, so first we need to go into that tool and check out, do the changes on the document and check in, right? So this is the process. Check out in the tool, do changes on job or object. Then third one is check in back to tool. So a data services central repository also has a similar approach. First you need to go and do a checkout, then go and do changes on the code, and then go and do a check-in from the tool so that these changes will be added. Now when I do a checkout, there are multiple options that are seen here. So one is object, so you know object and dependence, right? So these two because we added these objects that way into the central repository. When I do check out an object, only my object will be checked out, right? So let us go and see which has a dependence. I checked out my object. So none of my dependents are checked out, only my object is checked out. So I can do an undo checkout for the same object. And next one, when I do a checkout with objects and dependents, so all my tables under this object or all my dependent objects will be checked out, right? So if we go and look at my local repository, all my dependent objects will be checked out. So in this way I am trying to engage my central repository object, my local repository object, because if I do some changes here, these changes will get reflected in my central repository once I do an check-in, right? So please let me know if I am confusing you, because this is pretty important thing, and I'm trying to I'll repeat this again and again. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. Please stop me in between if you have any questions. So by doing a checkout, I am engaging my local object with my central object, right? So I'm trying to engage these two so that whenever I do some changes on this local, and once I do a check-in, so it will get reflected in my central. So this is the process. I do a checkout at the tool level, then I do a changes in my local, and then I do a check-in at the tool level, back in the tool level, so that my changes will be added back to the central repository. Okay, let us do this one and cross-check. So if I am doing a check-in or undo checkout with objects independence, I'll tell you a bit later why we have undo checkout. So let us go and look at this option. Now if you see my central, there are no dependent objects, no tables in my central, only one. The second one, promotion lookup, is not there. I need to add this. So select this one, do a checkout with objects and dependents, right? So now right click, check in with objects and dependents. And now you see this promotion lookup. This is a new object that is being added to the central repository, right? Just click on yes, adding the dependents to central repository, continue, and now you see this table is now added to the central repository, right? So this is what we do. So if you further go and look at this checkout mechanism, so it says objects, objects independence, right? We know that, and we also know what is with filtering. We don't know something about what is without replacement and without replacement. So it is objects without replacement, objects independence without replacement. So the general mechanism that happens is when you do a checkout from your central repository to your local repository, whatever the changes that are there in your or the latest version of the code in your central repository overrides your local repository. So let us go and do that for the job. So anyone has a question?
Hey Rakesh.
Hey Jafar.
I have one quick question. When we check out, right, and there is one option is undo checkout. So that's mean if we have in our local repository, right? So if someone make changes, so if you undo the checkout, so what will happen? It will remove from the local repository, because this is first time I'm looking at this one.
Okay, so when I do a checkout, when I do a checkout, right, so objects independence, I am just locking this object with my local repository from where I am configured.
Okay. So now
so
you
that
check out,
nobody,
right? So your checkout, right? So it's showing in our local repository.
Yeah.
And from the center, from the center object library, if we undo checkout, so it will take out from the local repository all the folders, everything?
No. I'll explain you. I'll clarify on this. I got your question. So now there are user 1, user 2, user 3 working on this project, and let us say this guy out the data store, right, or a particular job in the central repository. Now these two people will go and log into the same central repository and see the message saying that user 1 checked out this object, and unless this guy checks in back or undo checkout, so these two people cannot modify this one, right? They can get the latest version from the central repository, but if they want to overwrite it, they cannot, because it is already engaged by this local repository one. The reason why we need this is initially when admin adds these data stores into the central repository, he will keep them checked out, because these guys can anyways get the latest version. Though it is checked out, you can go and right click and get the latest version of the code into their local repositories and start working on that. To avoid somebody overwriting, because on a general human psychology, right? So let us say this guy is a junior level and this guy is a fresher. So when I give them the data stores, so they will, sorry. So when I give them the data stores, they'll have a curiosity to know the passwords or something like that, right? So it is general curiosity that will go in the initial days of our career, right? So I'll try to, open my local repository, right, and I get the latest version from my central. I have this data stored in my local. Now I'll go and click on edit, and I'll try to see what are the different passwords or what are the different options that I have. All right, I'll go and keep changing that, and if I do something like that, and if I just add it back to the central repository, right, so I am adding a wrong credentials data store to the central repository, and in future if anybody uses that, or if it goes to the QA system, then that is a bad data store. So to avoid such kind of things, if you want your work to be locked, right, so if you want your objects to be locked so that nobody else can go and access that one, so it will be locked by you, right? So no one else can go and override these things. So if they want to override, or if they try to override, it will throw an error message saying that this object is locked by user 1, so please get it unlocked by user 1 so that you can go and override this one. And this guy, user 1, will ask user 2, what is the reason that you want to overwrite my object? So if it is genuine, he can go and undo checkout, right? And if it is not genuine, so you can say, hey, you are trying to do something wrong, so please stop it there. You don't overwrite the data stores or don't overwrite my objects, rather than you go and create a new object yourself, right, and add it back to the central repository. So this is the reason why we have a checkout and undo checkout. Is that clear, Zafar?
Yes, I think I got the answer, but the little confusion I was thinking, so who will do the undo checkout? Because if I'm a developer, I check out already and I screwed up. So if I forgot, right? So as an admin, someone, because I
Yeah,
know,
so
because
let's
sometimes
say,
it happens, right? As a
yeah,
junior developer.
I got your point. So now this guy had a wrong password, right? And he already checked it into the central repository. He already screwed it up, right? Now, what an admin can do is, an admin can go and delete this one because admin will have full privileges on the central repository, and again add back his code to the central repository. He can do that activity.
Okay, so this is the one reason, right? So, for example, if someone changed the password or something, what about the work? For example, if it's some jobs and he modified, right? So when he was checking out, undo the checking out, right? So it will remove all the changes he made, or so he can also look at this one. So there are something like, for example, if he was working on one job, he made some stuff there, right? So he did only few mistakes, right? So we can see that one as well before they undo the checkout,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
his work will run right up, right? So we
Yeah,
don't want to.
I got your entire questions, Zafar. So the
Mhm.
thing is that you're talking about the entire things that we are going to see forward, right, in this one.
Yes.
So we just saw about checkout and undo checkout.
Uh,
So there are different options. So the answer to your questions, I believe we'll be talking about them in a bit, right? So
okay,
uh,
okay,
let me complete this one, and if you
okay,
still feel that if I did not answer some of your questions, please let me know. We'll
okay,
talk about
okay,
it.
okay. Thank
Okay?
you, thank you.
Right. So now, we saw something like checkout, objects and objects independence, objects without replacement and objects independence without replacement. The reason why we have this one is if I do a checkout with object and object independent, whatever I have in my central repository will overwrite my content in my local repository. I'll show you some examples there. And that is the reason why we have without replacement, because this is a human error, right? Again, that is a human error. The reason why is if my job goes to testing, I'm talking on a real-time scenario. So this account payable is in testing and there is a defect and this guy raises a defect. So the general process that you need to do is go to your tool, right? Check out your job, then go to your local repository, do the changes, and then go to your tool and check in your job. But the human error, what you'll do, you'll be so curious like, I did it perfect. Why did this guy find a fault in that? Let me go and check in my job. So I'll run to my job, right? That is a human tendency. I'll run to my job and I will go and see, this is the one. Let me go and fix it. I'll fix this one. And then now I'll see, because it is already there in my repository. I cannot select and right click and because it is already there. Now, if I go and do a checkout from my central repository, it will overwrite my content in my local repository. Got it? So when I, this is what I told you. So if I do a checkout with objects and dependents on my local repository, it will overwrite the content on my local repository. Whatever I don't have in my local repository or whatever I have in my local repository, the changes that are done, it will be overwritten with something that is there in the central repository. That I don't want that to happen. So that is the reason why we have these two options, objects and dependents and objects without replacement, right? So it will just engage my central and local repository, but it will not go and delete some stuff or overwrite some stuff in my local. It will just engage. So that is the reason why this objects and dependents without replacement is there. So if it is not without replacement, then it is with replacement. So when you do a checkout, it will go and do a replacement of object or replacement of objects and dependents within my local repository. So let me add a job for you and show it. So this, I'm trying conditions, scripts, and add to central repository. I'm adding objects and dependents. So all these objects are already there in the data store, right? I already added these data stores into the central repository. So it will not re-add the objects that are there. It will say they are like already present. You want to continue, click on yes, and adding the job, condition, scripts, and global variables central repository with dependents. Continue. Now if you go to the jobs tab, expand the bad job, you'll have this one, right? So now let us say I somehow lost this job from my local repository, right? I lost it. Or let's say my local repository is deleted, right? I want to get this job, or I don't have a job. I don't have this job in my local repository. I'm a code promotion consultant. So how do I get this job into my local repository? Or this why I developed this one, but this guy wants to refer to this job and build something else. So how do I get this one into his local repository? Right? Because this is a local repository which will not have. So the possibilities, corruption of local repository, or your local repository gets corrupted, your jobs are lost, or you don't have that job and you want to get that into your local repository. Or the third one is a code promotion guy wants to get the latest version of that job and load it into the QA environment. So these are the three different scenarios where we might need to do this activity. So select your job in the central object library, your central repository, and do get latest version with objects independence. So when I do that, I'll see my job back in my listing. So it is added back to my data services designer. Alright, so this is how you get the latest version. Now let us go and look at the options that you saw completely about checkout. Right, so when I say Marcy data flow, so let us think that this is my business requirement to add one more data flow to the Marcy conditional something. So I'm just adding one more data flow here. Now this is my business requirement. So as I told you with my human error, I just went ahead and first changed my job without doing a checkout activity. Or let me show it this way. One second. Alright, so this is my requirement. So the general process that you need to do is to add an additional changes to the existing job which is already present in the central repository. So what you need to do is the general process. You need to go and do a checkout with objects and dependents, which means the latest version of this job will override the latest version of my job in my local repository. Once the checkout is done, you'll see a check mark on this one. Now I open my job, do the changes. I'm just telling you the general process, right? Do the changes and save it in my local repository. then go and do check-in with objects and dependents. Click on yes, add 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just giving some comment here. Now it says check-in is completed. Just to cross-check that one, you go to your data flows and see an additional data flow is added, right? So this one, df date gen, is added because that is what we added in the Marcy conditional, which means your changes in the local repository is added, right? So let us say my human error without doing the checkout and check-in process, right? I went ahead into my job and I added my changes. I added my changes to my job, and now if I go and do a checkout, I'll show you with objects and dependents. What will happen when I do a checkout? It overwrites my local repository. So whatever the changes that I've done should be lost. So let us go back to this job and go to the condition Marcy. So all the changes that I've done are lost because it does a checkout. It overwrite my content in my local repository. So undo checkout. So though if I did a human error process, if I want to save my job, if I want to keep my changes in place, alright, so I'll save this. Now if I do a checkout, my changes will be gone, but if I do a checkout without replacement, objects and dependents without replacement, my changes will be there still in my job. It will not be overwritten because I did without replacement, right? So my changes are already present they're still there. So now to add these changes back to the central repository, I can do a check-in with objects and dependents and click on continue the change request 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if you go back to the data stores tab and see, now we have all these data stores whatever we added. So df date gen is already added, so these two are newly added things, so these two are present. So this is how you do a check-in and check-out. So I don't say that you should understand it as I teach you, but definitely a lot of practice is required on this one to make sure that you register all these different steps in your mind. So it takes a bit of time, but yeah, it is something mandatory that you should learn to talk meaningful things in your interview or to do a meaningful activity in your projects. So we saw this checkout, then all the options in checkout, and once we do this, we already saw check-in and all the options in check-in, when we also saw undo checkout. And we also know about get latest version. So when I don't have the job in this thing, so I can go and get what? Get latest version with, if I just want only the data store, I can get only the object. If I want data store and tables, I can go with objects and dependents. I don't want all the tables, but I want some, so I can go with filtering. Okay, so are you clear on these options? Like search, you can go and just search table name. If this table has something called as orders, the same search option that we have on our local repository, so you can just click on search, right? It will give you the total number of objects that are present in your central repository with the name orders, right? So it is just a normal search option. But let me know if you are clear till here, right? Check out. I just will take you to all these things, then check in, undo checkout, get latest version. If you are clear, then I will proceed with the remaining. If you have any doubts on this, I'll answer these things. Yes, Zafar.
Hey Rakesh, it's okay. I'm understanding everything, but I have one question. When you are check out with dependent, so it doesn't show you any warning. Like for example, it should show you something, right? Check and dependent, right? So if
It
you
will not show any warning because you know the basic assumption is when I'm adding this object into the central repository, right? Initially, I only added this to the central repository, so is the reason it is present in the central repository. When I do a checkout, the understanding it is the same object is present in my local repository, so it will overwrite to make sure that both are in sync, and you go and do the changes in your local and do a check-in so that you upload the changes back to the central repository. So that is the system level understanding, right? So because that is the process, you need to go and do a checkout, then do the changes, and then check in. But the human error, we always go and do the changes first. So to save that one as well, we have this options like with objects and dependents.
yeah,
Right?
I know,
Without
no, I understand everything. It's very straightforward. We do every time in the other projects. We have different system, right? But I was just asking, like, for example, if you make some extensionally, you did that one, right? So it remove all your local repository. So we don't have any backup, like we can mistakenly make the problem, right? So we can roll back.
Yeah, we can go and restore to the previous version. I'll show you how.
Okay, okay.
Okay, right.
Thanks.
We'll talk about that. So, Jafar, you're like asking me the next questions on this one that we are going to discuss. So I'll show you this thing. So the next one is get by label. So before
Okay,
get
sorry
by
about
label,
that.
no. I really appreciate your interest on this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one we have get by label and label latest version. So first we need to label a version, and then we can get by that label. So let us say I edit my, okay, let me do an undo checkout first. Alright, so now my default configurations, right? I'm just giving some rough examples here. So I keep this default to yes, and in central repositories default to QA, right? That's the difference in the data store. Now what I will do is I will label the latest version in the central repository with its objects and dependents as QA because that is the default setting there. Okay. Now I will check out objects and dependents without replacement because I already done changes in my local repository, and you know, if you want to cross check in my local repository, my default settings are configuration settings are for dev, and I will check in that with objects and dependents, apply changes changes in config, continue, right? And now I will go and label the latest version with objects and dependents as dev. Okay, right? I have two different labels, as I believe I created here. I have two different labels. One is dev and the other one is QA. Now if you look at the data store here, the default setting it is having here is dev. So if I do a get by label with objects and dependents and call it a QA label, so it will go and overwrite my QA this thing in my local repository. Right, so you see this one, this is now overwritten with my previous version. So Jafar, the answer to your question. So if I maintain different versions in my central repository and by doing some checkout, I know I screwed up something in my local, I want to go and go back to the previous version in my central repository, I can always have a label on that one. Or you can go by version also. I'll show you that one. So now this is how I get by label. So now it is QA. Let me go and do get by label with objects and dependents, and I call it as dev. Go to advanced, and it has a dev credentials now. So I can label my objects in my central repository, and I can get them by label or by version. So I'll show you how I can do that by version. So if you select an object and click on show history, it will tell you all the changes that we have done on this object from first step. So first step is you know added this object into the central repository with initial load. So if you want to get this version, right, so you can go and click on get by version, the first version that we added to the central repository. So Jaffer, one more thing, you can go and do this one, and this will overwrite everything in my local repository and set it back to my first step. The second one is I labeled it, then I did changes in my local and uploaded that, and I added this one. Now for this one I have both version and label, right? And for this I have both version and label because this is the latest version, and also it has a label dev. So if I want to get by anything, I want to get by label or get by version, I can do this. Or if I want to see the differences between these two labels, I can click on show differences, and it will open this window where I can see these differences in red. So if it is a table level, we can see that properly, but since this is a config level which is a back-end process, so you'll not be able to see that. So if you delete some objects, add some objects in your central repository, so you can easily identify the differences by this legend here. So all the newly changed ones will be with blue color, inserted ones will be with green, consolidated one with brown, and deleted with red. Right, so you'll see the legend here. So it's only two changes. It's captured true and false, right? So same things are shown here. So it is false and true. Now it is converted to true and false. So this is the configuration that we have done here. So we are changing that, right? So initially we kept it from true to false and false to true, and yes to no and no to yes. So that is the change that it is identified. So this is how you see the differences between two different versions. So you can see the entire history of an object by looking at the history, show history in the central repository, right? You can go back to the first version, you can go by a label and a version, you can go by, so when you don't have a label, you'll have only get by version activated, and you will see all the descriptions that we gave here, right? So changes in the configuration, initial load with the data store, and also if you look at the job here and look at the history, so adding the job, condition scripts and global variables with dependents, then next one is add 1 2 3 4, then change request 1 2 1 3 4. So whatever you give a comment, right, so that should be meaningful, should not be like this, because somebody after you who looks at this jobs should understand the entire history of the job. So what is the first version that he added, so what is the next version, and what are the changes that he has done. So he can go into his local repository, look at the history, so he can take the first version of the job, analyze this one, and then go and take the second version of the job and analyze that one, and then go and take the third version and analyze what are the changes that are done. So we should also mention the proper naming conventions and proper annotations on the code, and also a proper comments on the central repository, especially when we add this one. Alright, so are we clear till here? right? Show history, get by label, and label the latest version of the code. So this will label whatever it is there, the final version. We can go and label that and do further changes and add another labels to that one. Okay. So the next option that we have is delete. So since it is a non-secure central repository, everybody will have an option to delete. So anybody can go and delete objects in this job, but you know, the thing is that if you want to delete something, it will go and ask, right, sorry, it did not ask, but on the data store level, if you want to delete something, it will ask you if you want to delete it, dependent objects as well. So first all the dependent objects will be deleted, and then only the main object can be deleted. So it will ask you for these dependencies, but let me cross check if this is the same case. Yeah, the target data store cannot be deleted because it contains at least one child object, which is nothing but your dependent table. So all these things has to be deleted first, then only your parent object can be deleted, right? So this is a delete option, but since it is a non-secure central repository, everybody has an option to go ahead and delete this one. Right, so next one is compare. Compare that object to your local object library. So now this job is there. We've recently added this one just now. So if I go and delete some things here, right, save it. Now I want to compare my object with dependence to my local repository from central. It will highlight the differences. So which data flows are added, which data flows are deleted, right? So it will show you a detail level difference on that one. Right, so the reason why we have this compare option here is like, so you can go and see this one, the legend here, you can just click on that and it will show you what is deleted and what is changed, right? So the main thing that I'm trying to say here is, you know, over a period of time you'll do so many changes on your local repository, and you know, you'll not be sure like if your central is in sync with local repository. So to identify where you stand on your local and compare that with your central repository, you do a comparison between your local and central repository. Or if you want to do that with other repositories, you can go with these options here where you need to log in with their repository specific username and password. Or if you want to do a quick comparison with the objects in your local repository, you can do with objects and dependence to your local repository. And the last option that you have is refresh central object library. So this will just refresh the page, and you know, the reason why we have this one is, you know, we can have all these things on a real-time project in a cluster environment. Job server is installed on one machine, database is installed on another machine, the front-end GUI is installed on some other machine. So sometimes the connections must be down. So if you want to make sure that everything is up and running, so you can just go and do a refresh to make sure that whatever is there on the back-end database is shown here. It will just refresh the connections. So these are the different options that you have on a central repository. One is your checkout with objects, objects and dependents, objects without replacement, objects and dependents without replacement, and with filter. Then in check-in you'll have objects, objects and dependents, and with filter. Then you have an undo checkout option. Then you have a get latest version. So if you keep on adding multiple objects, you can get the latest version of that into the central repository. Or if you want to get the previous version, you can go and click on show history and get the previous version of the objects into the central into your local repository. Also you can label an object in the central repository. So if I added my development configuration job into the central repository, so I'll keep it specific to dev, so I can go and label latest version in my central repository and call it as dev, and I can go and label I can do the changes in my local, add it back to the central, and again label it with QA and then with prod. So if I go and look at my labels, I'll have 3 labels of my jobs in my central repository, where I will have dev, QA, and prod label. So I can go to different environments and I can get the code that I need. If I'm in dev, I'll get the dev code. If I'm in QA, I'll get the QA code, or if I'm in prod, I can get my production code. So this is how I maintain labels and versions in my central repository. I can go and delete because it is a non-secure. I can compare and refresh. So any questions on this one? Jaffer, are there any questions left on the central repository that you have and I did not answer?
Yeah, just one question. When you're comparing, we can move the object from local to central and central to local. If we are comparing here, like on this window, for example, it's showing on local that we have deleted these as a legend shows, right? So if I want to put it back to the central, so I can move it.
Yeah, we can do that because now this is my local window. Right, local, I have deleted all these things, but they are present in my central. So if I want to put them back in my local, all I can do is like checkout with objects and dependents. It will overwrite my local with the content in my central. And once it is done, if I do a comparison, then it should not show any differences because I overwrited my local with my central. So undo checkout with objects and dependents, click on yes. And now if I go and do a comparison with objects and dependents, it should not show any differences because now you don't see any deletes here, right? You only see the changes, so you don't see any.
So these 2 windows, when showing local and central, it just display, right? But you cannot do from this window, just drag and drop.
From this window, it is just a comparison. No.
Oh, you cannot drag and drop, right?
No, this is only for comparison.
Okay, thank you.
Let me try it out because even I haven't done that before. I'm taught in that process. So no, I don't have an option to drag and drop it here. Alright, so this is just to compare what you have in your local and what you have in your central. So the legend is shown in this bar. So these are the differences. Now both local and central are pretty much same. Now that's the reason why it is overwritten. So any more questions on this one? Sandeep, Bhargav, Venkatesh. Alright, so let me know if I can proceed with the secure central repository. I would like to complete this one today. If it is okay with you, if I'm not overloading you for one day, I can go ahead and complete the secure central repository as well. But if you want me to stop it here, I can.
I think it's up to you. If you want to continue, that will be okay. Ask the other.
Yeah, I'm checking with the others, Jaffer. Yeah. So guys, let me know if you can proceed or you want me to stop here.
And I have one more question. Like, do you have something like we can do some exercise, like a assignment or something to practice? Because I got the server access. So
we don't have any specific assignments, but whatever we discuss,
just try to watch
in the class. So I'm not sure like if this database adventure works or not when it is added. One thing I can do is I can zip this folder, source flat files, and I can send it to your email ID so that you can
especially that, right? which you explained for the central repository and all those things?
Yeah, this one I'll be sharing once this topic is done. I'll just share this page with you.
Yeah. So this is basically for the admin role, right? Not
Yeah.
for the architecture, right?
So this is a company. So if you the designing of this thing is an architecture role, like he decides on how many people are required for this and what are the different environments and all those things, and admin will go and create this one. He'll create the configurations or connections between the central and local repositories within an environment and cross environment connections. So all these things will be done by the
Yeah, it's
admin.
typically the same thing when we do regular work in our company, right? So we have
Yeah.
SAP, QA, all those things.
Same landscape, same
Yeah, same
SDLC,
thing.
but yeah, the thing is that it's a bit tuned to data migration specifications, right? It is specific to data migration when you say data services.
Okay.
All right,
That's
so
good.
I'll go and yeah, Zafar, sorry. Tell
No,
me.
that's fine. No, I'm just, okay. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just continue with the second topic, like how do I create a secure central repository. So now we know how to use a central repository. Now how to create a secure central repository. Again, this is an admin role, right? How to create a secure central repository and limit authorization. So this guy only has developer access, this guy only has tester access, this guy has complete access because he is an admin group member. So how do I set up all those things? So we will see that in a secure central repository. So to create a secure central repository, the first step that I need to do is go and upgrade my central repository to a secure central repository. So I need to do that checkbox thing on my repository manager and upgrade that one and re-register that in the central management console, and then go to data services management console. So this here you will see the central repository only if it's a secure central repository. So keep that in mind. So only once you upgrade the repository to a secure central repository, then only you will be able to see this here. So in the data services management console, you have something called as users and groups. Under your secure central repository, so there you can define the level of access for each person. So this guy can be an admin or it can be a tester. Right, so then we will config the secure central repository and see the differences between secure central repository and a non-secure central repository. So first step that I need to do is like upgrade it to my secure central repository. So go to the navigation, start, all programs, data services 4.2 and repository manager. So just give the same old credentials that you gave here. So Microsoft SQL Server, Vivo IDES and DB_CR is my database. Just click on get version. It says a non-secure central repository is present. Now select enable security. Now don't go and click on create again, right? So you need to upgrade, because the reason why you should not click on create is if you click on create, it will drop and recreate the entire stuff, which means all the objects that you have in the central repository or that you added in the central repository will be gone. So you need to make sure that you click on upgrade, and this gets upgraded to a secure central repository. Now get the version, and it says the secure central repository version 14.2 is present. So first step done. Second step, go to your central management console and re-register that. Alright, so go to your data services, and type of central repository we saw it is like non-secure central repository, dev cr dev 1234. So just when I say re-register, you just need to give the username and password one more time, test the connection and save it, and automatically it will be connected to a secure central repository. Okay. Now go to your data services management console. Data services management console. The navigation for that is Start All Programs Data Services 4.2 Data Services Management Console, or you can go to your Data Services Designer, close all the windows and show Start Page, and here you have an option to connect to Data Services Management Console, or you can go to Tools and from here you can connect to Data Services Management Console. So any option will take you to the same web page. Once you key in the username and password, go to the administrator. Alright, so we have another session to talk about each and every option that we have here. So if you look at this, once our transformations are done, then we have Management Console, Data Services Management Console, and Center Management Console. So we have separate sessions to talk in each and every option that we have. So don't think that I'm just skipping it right now. So we'll talk about these things a little later, because as I told you in the beginning, this will be a scenario based. So by the time we complete all the scenarios, we'll be completing the entire tool. Alright, so let's go with the administrator. So this is an admin tool option that we have. So once you click on that, it will show the different admin activities in that window. So in this system, it's a bit slow, so that's the reason why we were looking at the other server 88820. Now if you expand the central repositories under the administrator, you will see our newly added repositories. So though there are so many central repositories that are present here, so none of the non-secure central repositories are displayed there. Only the secure central repositories are displayed there. Right, so if you go and expand this one, you'll have something called as users and groups. So click on that one. Right, so you have two tabs called groups and users, and if you go to groups, there will be a default admin group called as a DI group. So if anybody is a part of this group, so by default they will get a complete privilege on the central repository. So next one, so first let me go and create the groups. So first one, add a group. I'll call this as admins. Admin, and click on apply. I'm not adding any members here, I just created a group here, admin. Then go and create a group called as testers. So I'll tell you why I haven't created something called as developers. Now go to the users tab and you have to add the users. From where you will add them? If you go to the Central Management Console homepage, you have something called as users and groups. You'll see this in this drop down. So if you go and look at the users, so we create a user here, right? This is the window where we go and create the users, and this users, once we create a user, we will set a different level authorizations to this guy, right? So so let me search for Rakesh here. So Rakesh ID is here, and if I go for the member of groups or user security. So I make him a member of administrators, then a member of which group, then profile values, account manager, right? So I can keep his password that it will never expire, right? I can set all these properties to this user. So this is how I create and add him to different groups so that he will have that level of authentication on the system. Right, so now I can call these users from this window. Oops. I just need 2 to 3 users, so I'm just searching for them. Right, I have this and I have the administrator. So I can use these 3. So I'm calling these 3 users from here to here, from central management console to data services management console. So click on add. So click on the drop down and type Rakesh, and you can keep him as a member of tester group, and you can remove the admin group here. You can just keep him as a member of tester group and click on apply. Now add one more user. Manual, and I'm keeping him as an active, and he is a member of DI group. Apply. Then add administrator. So I'll keep him a member of both DI group and admin group, and just click on apply. So I'm following 3 different scenarios. 1, a core tester, 1, a core administrator, and 1 person in 2 different groups, right? In both DI group and admin group. So I created my users and groups and mapped those users to those specific groups. Now, if I go back to my data services designer, go to central repositories, deactivate this one, delete this one, right click on add. Now it depends on which ID you add, right? If I add this with Rakesh and password, so now this is secure central repository, add it. Now it says secure. Now go and activate that. So remember, Rakesh is just a member of testers group. So now if you see this options here, so you'll not have much permissions on this one. So he cannot do a check-in, he cannot do a checkout, he cannot do an undo checkout. All he can do is get latest version, get by label, or look at the history and compare with this local object. So he does not have rest of the options, right? So you have something additional called as permissions when you make it as secure central repository. I'll show it to you in a bit. But all he can do is this. He can sorry, my bad throat. So he can get